Okay, biology. We've talked about the things that most people don't think are really alive, like viruses, and other things that definitely aren't alive, like prions and viroids. What we're going to start today are talking about the things that are most definitely alive. All right? These are things that are cells, so that we know that these are living things. This is chapter 18 in your book. Once again, just a reminder, it will never hurt for you to read your textbook for these things. Okay. So, the bacteria. There are three domains of bacteria. The first domain is the archaea. We talked about these a little bit, the archaebacteria. And I told you we won't spend a whole lot of time on these guys. They're hard to find, but you do need to know what they are. So know that much. So archaea, domain archaea, these are bacteria that are prokaryotes. And remember what prokaryote means. It means basically, literally, before kernel, the kernel referring to the nucleus. So prokaryotes don't have real nucleuses, okay? But they are similar, and just like all bacteria are prokaryotes, they are similar to bacteria in size and shape. And like we talked about before, archaebacteria are often extremophiles, but you can find them in a lot of different habitats. And something very interesting about them is that they are very often chemotrophs. Because they live in these extreme conditions, they have to find food wherever they can. So many of them eat chemicals. So that's what that means. Chemotroph, chemical, eat. All right. The second domain of bacteria are the bacteria, also known as the eubacteria, eu meaning true. So these are the true bacteria. And the third domain are the eukarya. All right, go to the next page here and see what we got. All right, so let's look at that main domain. That's the one we're going to be most interested in, is that eubacteria, domain bacteria. First thing we need to know about bacteria is that they are ubiquitous. The word ubiquitous means you find them everywhere. Literally every habitat you can imagine on the surface of the earth, we will find bacteria. And in the atmosphere, and in the upper atmosphere. Bacteria live in clouds. Bacteria lives in that last ozone layer of the atmosphere. Bacteria live in the bottom of the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest place that we now know, which is something like 11 miles below the surface of the ocean. Bacteria live there. So there is no place you can go on Earth where bacteria don't exist. And in fact, as you learn from Dr. Porco, if you were in health class, there are up to 500 different types living in just your mouth. The average numbers of types of bacteria living in a mouth is about 25. But there can be up to 500 different types living in just your mouth. They are, by far, the most widespread and abundant organisms on Earth. We group bacteria based on their need for oxygen. Okay, so the first group are things called obligate anaerobes. If they're obligate, that means they have to have it. They're obligated to have it, or have it that way. An means not, aerobes means oxygen. So obligate anaerobes are those that are obligated to not have oxygen, okay? This means oxygen is toxic to them. A great example of these type of bacteria are is the bacterium which causes tetanus. And if anybody who knows about tetanus, if you're walking around and you step on a rusty nail, you always, if you're not up to date on your tetanus shot and you go to the doctor, they will give you a tetanus shot. Because when you shove that bacteria up into your skin, and that opening is very small, and usually with that kind of a puncture, there might not be a whole lot of blood there, that's a perfect place for tetanus. There's not a lot of oxygen happening there. So that's where tetanus lives. Stuff like, well, it lives everywhere, but it really grows and multiplies in places of no oxygen because oxygen is toxic to it. It's a Clostridium bacteria, and that comes from a group of bacteria that cause a lot of diseases. Then we have the obligate aerobes. Okay, obligate again means they're obligated, and aerobes is oxygen. So these are the bacteria that need oxygen. Really good example of that kind of bacteria is the bacterium that causes tuberculosis. Where does tuberculosis live? Anybody know? It lives in your lungs. And guess what? There's a lot of oxygen to be had in your lungs. So that's a great example of an obligate aerobe. All right. The third group is the facultative aerobe. And these are the really interesting ones because these can survive with oxygen or without oxygen. All right, a good example of if there's oxygen there, sure, they're great with it. They'll use it. If there's not, sure, they're great with it. They don't need it. Okay? So facultative means depends on the situation. Great example of those are E. coli, Escherichia coli, that live in your gut and actually aid in your digestion. Bacteria, I think we'll stop right there maybe. Do this in small spurts.